My next guest is Kabir Nath, President and CEO of Otsuka America, a pharmaceutical company with a focus on neuroscience, nephrology, and digital innovation. It's great to see you, Kabir. Thank you very much for joining us. I don't know if you heard the last discussion, but I was sort of interested in the tie-in between what Otsuka and Therapeutics was doing. But before we get into that, I also know you've got a new deal in gene editing with CRISPR, and you're active on a lot of fronts. But part of what we're looking today is also at the mental health side of it. And I don't know how to be, I'm going to just be very blunt. I have a lot of friends that work in this area, and it's an area where we haven't seen the kind of innovation that one would have hoped for, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's some inflection point, and we're beginning to see new things come on that can help people that are in really very desperate circumstances. What can you share with us?
No, thanks for that, Steve. So, I think your first statement was fair. Unfortunately, from a pharmacologic point of view, over the last 20 years, shall we say, there hasn't been that much progress in the treatment of mental illness. And I think people are aware that we spend a lot of money and a lot of effort looking at genomic approaches, looking for biomarkers and so on of schizophrenia or bipolar depression or major depressive disorder, and we haven't seen them. What we know is there is a complex mix of physiological, social, environmental factors that all contribute. And clearly in the last year, sadly, we've very much seen how those social, environmental, external factors contribute to the development of mental illness. But I think there is significant hope on the horizon. I was happy to hear some of what David was saying. And as you know, Otsuka and Click are partners, and it was happy to talk more about that. But we really do see the opportunity for digital technology to play a significant role in the future in the treatment of behavioral health, in the treatment of mental illness. And I think it's around the fact that you can truly envisage an app with the appropriate regulation, the appropriate science and so on behind it, but you truly can envisage an app that is designed to ameliorate some of the symptoms of mental illness. So that, I think, is a very exciting area, and an area that, as you heard from David, that there are a number of companies really focusing on, and we're very much part of that. And I think there are also some novel mechanisms coming and so on, and we are among the companies that have made an investment in the psychedelic space. That's an area that's getting a lot of attention now as well. And in fact, just in the last couple of days, some very significant data was released on the use of MDMA, popularly known as ecstasy, in the treatment of PTSD, with some really stellar results there. So I think that's a very intriguing area of innovative science as well. So those are a couple I would focus on.
I think this is the first time psychedelics have been. I've been approached by lots of people in this world, and I have to ask you, at some level, there is a sense that people like myself who've not been exposed to that feel like it sounds really fringe. It sounds very dangerous. It sounds like a frontier that is kind of uncomfortable. Maybe there's stigma attached to it. But I know that that's part of the evolution of science. And I wasn't expecting to ask you this, but how do you deal with the dimensions of looking at very new? Is it sort of what we were dealing with, the kind of marijuana discussion where there's growing comfort in discussing those sorts of issues? But how inside Otsuka and in the communities that you run in do you deal with just normalizing psychedelics?
Yeah, so it's a great question. So, I think just a very little bit of history, when they were first discovered, and when, for instance, LSD was first synthesized, for the next 15, 20 years, there was actually significant scientific experimentation around some of these molecules. And, some really interesting results were generated right back in the 50s and so on and into the early 60s. Then, to your point, for a bunch of reasons, and it was, I think, principally in the US, but ultimately it was worldwide, the kind of the countercultural elements, the abuse of those things shut it down completely. So you're right, from kind of the 60s on, for really 40 years, not much was happening. But there were always scientists who actually understood that there could be potential here. And what you've seen, I guess, in the last decade is a number of renowned institutions, Johns Hopkins, Imperial, places in California as well, that have continued to really advance both research and initially small clinical trials in this area. And I think, what we're now seeing is an increasing body of evidence that for some of these really intractable things like treatment-resistant depression, there is, or PTSD, there is a real possibility of helping some patients. Now, it's complex, it's therapy assisted. The therapy is as much a part of the treatment as the molecule itself. I think what you are seeing emerge is a normalization, at least in some of the community. You're seeing companies that are going public here in the States, in Canada, and so on. And yes, of course, these are difficult conversations. There are people who don't believe in this, and there is a fringe around microdosing and recreational usage and so on that's not necessarily helpful to the broader medical scientific dialogue. But I think we're really seeing it emerge. And as you said, for marijuana, we've seen that movement over the last 15 years or so. And I think we will see it in time in psychedelics. And you're starting to see it in some pockets of deregulation in some cities and states as well.
Now, let me ask you another unfair question, Kabir. One of my favorite people is Vivek Murthy, Surgeon General. I've interviewed him before. We had Elmo pop up once when we were talking about vaccinations and how to get over the fear people have. Debbie Stabenow will be on later talking about mental health and how to get more infrastructure out there. I'm interested from a scientific technician's perspective, a doctor inside the pharmaceutical world. What do you need to align in government policy and in the way communities look at you? Because I'm very aware this is not just laboratories and test tubes. It's also people. But I'm also, when I get Vivek Murthy and I get Stabenow up here, I sort of feel like, gosh, how do we connect to the labs? What are those connectivity points? And I just love to get your insights as we're talking in Big Think today. What would be the things that would help us achieve greater outcomes between your world and kind of real human beings that are suffering?
No, thanks. I just first straight up, I'm not a doctor. I'm not one of the scientific. I'm one of those commercial guys. So this is actually part of my job to actually understand.
Well, you sort of seem like you could be a doctor, but you're the money guy. Okay, I get that. But you still have to make decisions.
Absolutely. So I think, what you have mentioned there is a really, really important point. It comes back to the first thing you said, which is, have we made enough progress in the treatment of mental illness? And the answer is no. And there are a bunch of reasons for that. We started a little bit with some of the scientific reasons and how do we get to new drugs and new actually forms of treatment. But I think, believe, have always been humble enough to know that the drug or the injection or the digital therapeutic is only a very small part of the journey to improving outcomes in mental illness. There are complex social environmental factors, and what we as pharmaceutical companies have to do and have to do better, frankly, is in fact putting the patients at the center of our concerns and how we get to them. And if there's a silver lining to the pandemic, it has been that the adoption of technology in how we do that has been really kind of catalyzed and accelerated. So in psychiatry specifically, we've seen telehealth, which was always important, really take off. And with that, some of the constraints, both regulatory, financial, and so on around telepsychiatry have been removed. And that clearly gives an option for many more people. As David was saying earlier, digital therapeutics, and I'm conscious that not everyone has access to technology and so on, so there are issues around that, and we need to really understand that as well. But as David Klein was saying, digital, again, can get you to many, many more people and can get you without some of the stigma and concern associated with actually having to visit a physician, visit a therapist, and so on. So, but it's incumbent on us as companies to actually take these advances, partner more effectively with communities to actually get them there and get them adopted.
I'm going to sneak in one other quick question. In the world of digital therapeutics, and we're really talking about different areas of science overlapping in ways that they may not have before. Tom Khalil, who used to work in science and technology policy for both President Obama, President Clinton, told me, he said, people who overinvest in, say, NIH, just one area, don't understand that you need advances in mathematics. You need advances in, other forms of the scientific arena so that you can get these overlays that help drive innovation and insights. What is your sense of the field right now? Where are we underfunding research? I'm sure Otsuka has partnerships with universities around the world. Where do you see gaps that we need to be thinking about that may not be getting the funding, but you see as really fundamental to jumping forward in the next leaps in technology?
So I actually think it's in some of what you just brought up and what we talked about. So it's in that ability to marry good science with technology to translate that into things that actually resonate with patients and that we can get to them. So, I mean, to your point, we can have great science, even something like psychedelics is fascinating science. It's old molecules, but it's fascinating science. But until we can marry that with partners and collaborators. So I think it's not so much about where the areas of research, it's really about being much better than we have been historically as a pharma industry in building those collaborations with technology partners, with other partners, so that we can actually translate these improvements in science, this intersection of the digital and the scientific, translate it more effectively into what matters for patients.
Well, I really appreciate the conversation. I hope you come back because I know I can tell you're fun, even though you're not a doctor, you're just the president and CEO. Kabir Nath, president and CEO of Otsuka America Pharmaceuticals. It was a real pleasure talking with you today. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I enjoyed it too. Thank you.